The healer's cottage is too neat, too quiet. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters, their scents sharp and clean, but the stone bench under Mara Alden's thighs might as well be carved from ice. She laces her fingers together in her lap to hide the tremor in them as the old woman across from her smooths a parchment flat. Mara, the healer says softly, eyes skimming one last line before lifting. The scarring is deep. Your womb won't carry a child to term. Not now. Not ever. The words are simple. They cut like a blade anyway. Mara stares past the healer's shoulder at the shelves of tidy clay jars, each one labeled in a careful hand. Feverfew. Comfrey. Wolf's bane. She focuses on the ink strokes until they blur, because if she looks anywhere else, the room will tilt and her chest will crack open in front of this woman who has known her since she was a girl. Nothing? Mara hears herself ask. Her voice doesn't sound like it belongs to her. No tonic, no charm, no miracle you haven't tried yet? The healer hesitates, just long enough for Mara to see the answer before it's spoken. If you were anyone else, I'd say there's still a chance, she admits. But with the damage, with your wolf never coming forward, she shakes her head. The odds are a whisper in a storm, child. I won't lie to you. A hollow roar rises in Mara's ears. She thinks of the little cradle she keeps shoved into the corner of her sleeping chamber, half hidden beneath old cloaks so the servants won't whisper about her foolishness. Of the spunwool blanket she knitted last winter, imagining small fingers tangling in the loops. Bedtime stories murmured beside a hearth, of first shifts celebrated under a full moon, of a child with her eyes and Brannock's dark hair laughing as the pack held around them. None of it will ever belong to her. By the time she steps back into the gray afternoon, the healer's door closing with a soft click behind her, Mara feels as if she's already been erased from the life she thought she'd have. The village blurs past in shades of damp wood and smoke, faces turning away as she passes, a wolfless woman with nothing left to offer. She doesn't know yet that while she mourns the child she can never carry, fate is about to press a different child into her arms, and shove her straight into the path of the baby's father. Subscribe now so you're here for every turn this story takes. Mara trails her fingertips along the rim of the cradle as if touching it might summon a life that was never there. Afternoon light slants through the shutters of Brannock's house, stripping the empty nursery in pale gold. Dust motes spin lazily above the tiny mattress, over the neatly folded blankets she sewed in secret. 3 days since the healer's verdict, and the room already feels like a shrine to a future that died before it began. I will never be a mother, she whispers, the words tasting like ash. It was bad enough being wolfless. Most shifters feel their other half before they're grown, the wild, ancient presence coiled in their bones, lending sharpness to their senses and strength to their limbs. First shifts are celebrated with bonfires and feasts, the whole pack howling as fur bursts from skin under the moon. Mara's wolf never came. At first, everyone said it was late blooming. Then they said it was unfortunate. Eventually, they said nothing at all, but their silence was heavier than any insult. A shifter who can't shift, who has no wolf, is the closest thing the pack has to a walking shame. Brannock married her anyway. He'd said all the gracious words when they bonded. That her gentle nature mattered more than the beast she lacked. That her father's influence on the council would keep their future children secure, wolf or no wolf. He'd smiled for the pack and squeezed her hand until her fingers ached. Afterward, in the privacy of their chambers, he'd added, with my blood, perhaps our pups will be strong enough to make people forget. Now there will be no pups at all. The door creaks behind her. Mara drops her hand from the cradle and turns as Brannick steps into the nursery, broad shoulders filling the doorway. His dark hair is tied back, his leathers half-fastened, as if he couldn't decide whether to come to her or to the training yard. "You're in here again," he says. Not quite an accusation. Not quite kind. "Where else would I be?" Mara doesn't mean for the bitterness to slip out, but her control is frayed. Brannick's jaw tightens. He glances at the cradle, then looks away as if it offends him. "You should be resting," the healer said. "The healer said I'm barren," Mara cuts in, voice flat. "You don't need to soften it for me." She was very clear. He flinches, just a flicker, then smooths his features into something more neutral. "We'll be all right," he says, reaching for the reassuring tone he uses at council meetings. "I still have my standing. You still have your father's name. Not every bond produces children. It isn't the end of the world." But his eyes slide to the window, where distant howls float in from the training fields, young wolves sparring, building strength for the future he always planned to lead. In that instant, Mara sees the truth. He's already measuring the gap between the life he wanted and the one he's stuck with. "You married a wolfless wife who can't even give you an heir," she says quietly. "It may not be the end of the world, Brannick, but it is the end of the world you expected." His mouth hardens. "Don't put words in my mouth." "We could adopt," Mara hears herself suggest, the thought slipping free before she can swallow it. "There are orphaned pups in the outer villages. Children from mixed unions who don't have packs. We could raise someone else's problem?" Brannick lets out a sharp, humorless laugh. "No. Pack bonds are blood, Mara. You know that. I'm already generous enough, standing by you after this news. Don't ask me to hang our line on a stranger's shoulders." The words sting more than she wants them to. Generous enough. As if loving her, even a little, is a charity he offers at cost to himself. Mara turns away so he won't see the fresh tears burning her eyes. Outside, a pack mother crosses the courtyard with a toddler on her hip, another little one trotting at her side. Their laughter filters in through the shutter slats, bright and easy. The sound lands like a stone in Mara's chest. She presses a hand to her flat belly, mourning a heartbeat that was never there. The sharp rap of knuckles on wood splits the heavy silence. Brannick frowns and strides out to the main room. Mara follows, wiping her cheeks on her sleeve. When he yanks the door open, a young runner stands on the threshold, chest heaving, mud spattered up his leggings. "Gamma Brannick," the boy gasps, dipping his head, then flicking a glance at Mara. "Forgive the intrusion. There's an urgent message from the Ironwood border keep." Mara's heart jumps. "Ironwood?" The runner shifts his weight. "Luna Saren Blackwell," he says, voice dropping. "She was ambushed by rogues along the ridge. The healers don't think she'll last the night." Mara's fingers go numb. Saren. The girl who used to sneak into her father's orchard to steal apples with her. The friend who stood by her when her wolf never came, until politics and distance tore them apart. They haven't spoken in years. "She's asking for you," the boy adds, gaze fixed squarely on Mara now. "By name. She says she must see you. Only you." Brannick's shoulders stiffen. "Our borders are already strained," he says. "We can't spare my time for." "I'll go," Mara blurts. Both males look at her. Saren wouldn't call for me without reason, she says, throat tight. If she's dying, the word feels wrong in her mouth. Saren is all sharp laughter and stubborn will in her memories. The idea of that going silent seems impossible. I won't let her go without answering. Brannick's gaze darkens, calculations turning behind his eyes. You think it's wise to be seen running to another alpha's territory right now? You're my wife, Mara. My alliances are your alliances. I'm also Saren's friend, she says, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. Or I was, once. If this is the last thing I ever do for her, I'm doing it. For a moment she thinks he'll forbid her. Then he exhales sharply and steps aside. Fine. Go, Brannick says. But don't get tangled in whatever mess the Blackwells have stirred up. We can't afford to be dragged into their drama. He says it is like Saren's life is an inconvenience. Mara doesn't answer. She pulls her cloak from its peg, fingers clumsy on the ties, and follows the runner out into the chill air. The sky is low and heavy, the kind of gray that promises rain. As they set off toward Ironwood, the village falls away behind her, Brannick's house shrinking into a dark smudge on the hill. The road to the border winds through dense forest, the trees closing overhead until the world narrows to the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of crows. Mara's thoughts spin with every step, memories of Saren's easy grin, of whispered promises they'd always choose each other over pack politics, of the letter that never came when Saren married Cale Blackwell instead. Hours later, when the trees finally thin, the Ironwood estate rises from the mist, a fortress of stone and timber perched above the ridge, its watchtowers bristling with sentries. Torchlight flickers along the walls, reflected in eyes that gleam wolf-bright as the guards scent Mara's approach. She draws her cloak tighter around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how small she must look in front of those towering gates, a wolfless, childless woman summoned to the bedside of a dying Luna. Mara has no way of knowing that beyond these walls waits not just an old friend's final request, but the tiny, wolfless baby who will remake her life, and the furious alpha father whose arrival will tear everything she thought she knew apart. The gates of the Ironwood estate yawned open with a groan of heavy timbers and chain. Cold air spilled out from the courtyard beyond, carrying the copper tang of blood and the bitter smoke of pitch torches. Mara swallowed against the sting in her nose as she stepped through, the young runner at her side falling back with a respectful dip of his head. This was as far as his orders took him. Through the main hall, he murmured. The guards will show you. The guards did more than show her. Two broad-shouldered wolves in armor flanked her as she crossed the cobbled courtyard and climbed the front steps, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim. The Ironwood crest, a stylized tree with roots tangled around a wolf's skull, hung above the doors like a warning. Mara's boots clicked too loudly on the stone. She smoothed damp palms down the front of her simple dress, feeling small and out of place as the doors boomed shut behind her. Inside, the manor smelled of old wood, steel, and fear. The main hall was crowded and strangely quiet. Warriors stood in clusters along the walls, weapons belted and fists clenched, their low murmurs dying as Mara passed. She saw grief in their faces, anger, confusion. None of it was for her. She was just a messenger the storm had dragged in. A gray-haired Omega hurried up, apron stained with herbs. Mara Alden, she asked. Yes. Mara's voice came out thin. You sent for me. Saren. Luna Saren is waiting. The woman's expression pinched. We must be quick. Quick. As if time were a bandage they were already peeling away. The Omega led her down a narrow corridor that smelled strongly of antiseptic herbs and boiled linen. Behind closed doors, Mara heard the rasp of labored breathing, the low murmur of healers, the occasional muffled sob. This was where Ironwood tried to keep its secrets, behind stone and heavy wood, where the rest of the world didn't have to look. At the end of the hall, the Omega paused outside a door bound in iron. "Prepare yourself," she said softly. "It's not how you remember her." Mara didn't bother to say there was no preparing for this. She simply nodded, fingers curling into her skirts, and stepped inside when the door swung open. The room beyond was dim except for the guttering candles clustered on a table and the orange glow of a single brazier. The air was thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and crushed herbs. A pallet had been dragged into the center of the chamber. Saren lay on it. For a heartbeat, Mara's mind refused to connect the pallid, torn figure on the bed with the laughing girl who used to race her along the riverbanks. Saren's hair, once a tumble of sunstruck gold, was matted dark with sweat and blood. Bandages swathed her side, the linen already soaked through. Her skin had the waxy sheen of someone who'd long since passed the edge of pain into something worse. Beside the bed, a small cradle had been tucked close, as if the child inside could anchor her to life. The baby's eyes, startlingly bright, unfocused blue, blinked up at the ceiling. A knitted blanket, soft and familiar-looking, wrapped her all the way to her tiny chin. Mara's breath stuttered. "Saren," she whispered. Saren's eyes were closed, lashes casting fragile shadows on her cheeks. At the sound of Mara's voice, they fluttered and cracked open. For a moment there was confusion in their glassy depths, then sharp recognition cut through the fog. "Mara?" Her voice was raw, scraped thin. "You came." "Of course I came." Mara moved to the bedside, every instinct screaming that she was too late and it wasn't fair. She reached for her old friend's hand and flinched at the chill in Saren's fingers. "What happened to you?" "Rogues." Saren's lips curved in something that might have been a bitter smile. "We pushed them back, but one got in close." "Sloppy of me." Mara swallowed hard. "The healer has done what she can." Saren's gaze flicked briefly toward the far corner, where a healer sat slumped in a chair, exhausted, eyes bruised with sleeplessness. "This body's not listening anymore." "Don't talk like that," Mara said, the words reflexive. "You're Luna of Ironwood." "Kale won't, he won't allow." Saren's fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Kale is out hunting the ones who did this," she said. "By the time he returns, I'll be ash and bone. That's why I sent for you." The room swayed. Mara forced herself to breathe, to focus. "Why me, Saren? We haven't spoken in years." "I know." Saren's eyes glistened, not with fever but with regret. "I was a coward. I let politics and pride get between us. I thought there'd be time to fix it. Turns out, the moon has other plans." Her gaze shifted toward the cradle. Mara followed it, and her heart stopped. The baby was so small. She lay on her back, fists tucked close to her cheeks, mouth pursed in a serious little line. The knitted blanket, Mara's blanket, she realized with a jolt, the same pattern she'd used for the one folded in her own empty cradle, was wrapped snug around her. A tuft of pale hair fuzzed the top of her head. When Mara leaned closer, the infant turned, nose wrinkling as if catching a new scent. Something inside Mara lurched, sharp and fierce and unfamiliar. "Her name is Anwen," Saren said quietly. She's mine. And Kale's. Mara looked back at her friend, throat tight. You have a child. Pride, bright and painful, burned in Saren's eyes. I do. She came screaming into the world 2 months early and hasn't stopped making demands since. The pride fractured, and fear rushed in behind it. Mara, I called you because I need you to take her. The words landed like a physical blow. Mara straightened. What? Saren licked cracked lips. The healer moved as if to intervene, but Saren shot her a look that froze her in place. She wasn't Luna for nothing. Kale's line is old, Saren said. Powerful. The Blackwell wolves have ruled Northern Ridge for generations. Their blood is a symbol as much as it is strength. Do you understand? Mara nodded slowly. She'd grown up hearing tales of the Northern Ridge Alpha, their savagery in battle, their iron honor, their obsession with keeping their bloodline untainted. Kale Blackwell was as much legend as man in the border villages. Anwen should have been their triumph, Saren continued. The cherished heir. Proof that the Blackwells could still produce strong pups. Should have, Mara echoed. Saren looked away. Her hand slipped weakly from Mara's grip, fingers picking at the edge of the blanket over her stomach. She doesn't smell right, Saren whispered. Mara blinked. What? Other pups, Saren took a shuddering breath. You can feel they're wolves, even when they're tiny. A hum under the skin. A promise. Anwen is quiet. Mara's heart clenched. She's only weeks old. I know. Kale says I'm worrying for nothing. That the bond will show when she's older. Saren's eyes slid to the cradle again, and this time they shone with something like shame. But I know what it is to live wolfless in a world that worships the beast inside you. Mara stiffened. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. You think she has no wolf? I think the moon gave us a child who won't be what this pack expects. Saren's voice broke on the last word. I think Kale will love her anyway, but his council? His allies? They will twist it. Use her against him. Make her a weapon or a weakness, but not a person. Mara tried to imagine this tiny, solemn baby passed from calculating hands, hidden away in some back hall so she wouldn't stain the Blackwell reputation. Her stomach turned. Saren, Kale is her father, she said, forcing her tone to stay gentle. He wouldn't let that happen. You don't know him like I do, Saren said hoarsely. He would bleed for her. Kill for her. But he serves more than his own heart. He serves a pack, a legacy. And if those two things are ever at odds, she let the sentence trail off, eyes closing briefly. I can't ask him to break his oath to save one child. Even our child. Mara's gaze dropped to the cradle again. Anwen's tiny fingers had worked free of the blanket. They flexed in the air, unconcerned with oaths or legacies. What are you asking me? Mara whispered, though she already knew. Saren reached under her pillow with a trembling hand and drew out a roll of parchment, sealed with dark wax. The effort made sweat bead on her upper lip. I had these drawn up weeks ago, she said. Quietly. If anything happened to me, if Kale was away. I wanted options. Choices that weren't dictated by his counsel or his pride. She pressed the parchment into Mara's hands. This grants you guardianship of Anwen in the event of my death. Mara stared at the seal, at the delicate script, at the place where Saren's name had been signed with a flourish that wobbled at the end. This is madness, Mara said weakly. You're Luna of Ironwood. I'm just my friend, Saren cut in. The only one I trust to love her for who she is, not what she represents. Her voice gained a desperate edge. You know what it is to be different. To be stared at and measured and found lacking because a piece of you didn't show up when everyone said it should. I won't condemn my daughter to that if I can help it. The words pierced straight through the numbness blanketing Mara's chest. She thought of the way pack members' gazes slid over her, always shadowed with pity or contempt. The way children whispered about the Gamma's wolfless wife. The way Brannick had started leaving earlier and coming home later after the healer's verdict, his bed colder even when he was lying in it. Anwen let out a soft, questioning noise from the cradle. Without quite deciding to move, Mara stepped forward and reached down. The baby's skin was warm under her fingers as she cradled the small body against her chest. Anwen smelled faintly of milk and clean wool. When Mara tucked her in close, the baby made a little sighing sound and relaxed, fist curling against Mara's collarbone. Heat flooded Mara's throat and behind her eyes. The ache that had been gnawing at her since the healer's cottage suddenly sharpened into something else, something fierce and protective and terrifying in its intensity. I don't know how to be a mother, she whispered. No one does, at first. Saren's smile wavered. But you know how to be kind. How to stand when the ground shakes. That's more than enough. Her gaze drifted to the parchment now clutched in Mara's hand. Please. Swear it. Swear you'll keep her safe. That you'll love her, wolf or no wolf, no matter what the packs say. Mara looked down at the baby in her arms. Anwen's eyes had opened again, blue and clear, studying Mara's face with an intensity she couldn't possibly understand. Mara thought of her own empty cradle. Of Brannick's cool, careful words. Of the way her chest had felt like a hollow cave for days, echoing with all the things she'd never have. The hollow wasn't empty anymore. It was full of this small, fragile weight and the terrifying responsibility of the choice before her. I swear, she said, voice shaking but sure. I'll keep her safe, Saren. I'll raise her as my own. I'll never let anyone make her feel like less because of what she is, or isn't. Relief washed over Saren's features so visibly that it hurt to watch. Good, she breathed. Good. Then it was worth it. All of it. Her eyes fluttered closed again. Her breathing hitched. Saren? Panic clawed up Mara's spine. You rest now. When Kale returns, we'll tell him together. He'll see, I'll explain. No, Saren's fingers scrabbled for Mara's wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes snapped open, fever bright. Not yet. He can't know I planned this. Not while he's drowning in rage. He'll see only betrayal and weakness. You must go before he returns. Go? Mara echoed, stunned. Leave? With Anwen? Yes. Saren coughed, the sound wet and horrible. Blood flecked her lips. The healer rose from her chair, but Saren shook her head sharply. Out through the servants' gate. The papers will hold if he tries to challenge you, but only if you're away from here. Away from Ironwood. Away from his anger. Mara's mind reeled. Saren, I can't just steal your child. You're not stealing her, Saren said fiercely. You're honoring me. You're giving her a life I may never have been able to. Please, Mara. I don't have many breaths left. Don't make me waste them arguing. Mara flinched at the raw plea. She looked down at Anwen, at the soft rise and fall of her chest, the tiny fist working against the blanket. If she stayed, there would be explanations, arguments, political fury. Kale's council would circle like vultures around a wounded leader and his inconvenient child. Anwen would become a symbol before she ever became a person. If Mara left, she had nothing. No pack protection. No home that wanted her. Only a promise and a baby who didn't yet know the shape of her own future. Please, Saren whispered again. Mara's choice had already been made the moment she lifted Anwen from the cradle. This was just her catching up to it. All right, she said, throat tight. I'll go. Saren's shoulders slumped, the last of her tension easing. Thank you, she murmured. For coming. For everything. Mara bent and pressed her lips to Saren's forehead, tasting salt and fever. I'll tell her about you, she promised. Every day. She'll know you loved her enough to do this. A single tear slipped from the corner of Saren's eye. Her first word will probably be stubborn, she tried to joke, but the breath carrying the words stuttered. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a howl rose, long and keening, picked up by others along the ridge until the sound drilled through stone. Saren's eyes unfocused for one long, suspended heartbeat. Then her chest fell, and didn't rise again. The healer moved swiftly, fingers searching for a pulse, but Mara knew. The air changed when a soul left a body. It went thinner. Sharper. Like winter air through bare branches. Mara stood frozen, Anwen clutched to her chest as the infant squirmed, sensing something wrong in the air. Luna Saren Blackwell is gone, the healer whispered, more to the room than to anyone in particular. She crossed herself with fingers stained green from herbs, then looked at Mara. You should go. Before the Alpha returns. Mara swallowed against the knot in her throat and nodded. Her legs felt wooden as she gathered the parchment and the baby's meager belongings, a few cloths, a second blanket, a carved wooden wolf that had probably been meant for some future shelf. The Omega who'd led her here thrust a small satchel of dried meat and bread into her free hand, mouth set in a grim line. For the road, she said. And, for what it's worth, Luna Saren did right to choose you. You haven't flinched once. Mara didn't feel brave. She felt cracked open, raw and shaking. But there was no time to argue. No time to do anything but move. She slipped out through a narrow servant's passage as the first morning hells began to build outside, leaving Ironwood the way she'd come, only this time with more weight in her arms and far less in her heart. The journey back to Brannock's village blurred into a series of small, brutal moments. Anwen's hungry cries in the trees, forcing Mara to stop and fumble with unfamiliar swaddling as she tried to feed her with the goat's milk a sympathetic kitchen boy had pressed into her hands at the last minute. The way the baby finally quieted, cheek pressed against Mara's collarbone, as if the rhythm of her borrowed heartbeat was enough. The ache in Mara's shoulders from holding that precious weight and her growing terror that she would do something wrong, hurt this fragile scrap of life entrusted to her care. By the time the village's wooden palisade came into view, dusk was settling over the roofs like a tired hand. Smoke curled from chimneys, the scent of stew and wet earth mingling in the air. Mara paused just outside the gate, adjusting Anwen's blanket. The baby's eyes were closed, mouth working in sleep. Her tiny hand had escaped again, fingers loosely curled around the edge of Mara's cloak. You deserve better than this place, Mara whispered, then winced at her own disloyalty. But the words felt true. The gate guard nodded her through with barely a glance. To him, she was just the Gamma's wolfless wife returning from some errand. No one looked closely enough to see the tiny bundle in her arms until she reached the steps of Brannock's house. Even then, the first one to notice wasn't a pack warrior or a neighbor, it was the old hound that slept beneath the porch. The dog lifted its head, nostrils flaring, and let out a questioning whine. "Shoo," Mara soothed. "She's new. Be kind." She pushed the door open with her shoulder and stepped inside. The familiar main room, smoke-blackened beams, stone hearth, Brannock's weapons hanging in precise order on the wall, felt smaller than it had 3 days ago. Or maybe Mara had just outgrown it in the space between the healer's cottage and Saren's deathbed. She crossed to the nursery and, for the first time since the room had been prepared, laid a child in the waiting cradle. Anwen fit there as if the space had always belonged to her. Mara smoothed the blanket around the baby, fingers lingering on the soft wool. Anwen fidgeted once, then stilled, breath puffing in little sighs. Mara's chest ached so hard it felt like a wound. "There," she murmured. "Safe. For now." For a few precious moments, she allowed herself to imagine it could stay like this. That Brannock would come home, see the baby, and something in him would soften instead of harden. That he would accept Saren's papers and the promise that had bound Mara's hands and heart. The front door opened with the force of that hope cracking. Brannock's boots thudded across the main room. Mara's body tensed instinctively, but she stayed where she was beside the cradle, smoothing a gentle hand over Anwen's downy hair. "Mara?" Brannock called. "I heard the gate guard say you were back. What did Ironwood want with you? They've had enough of our—" He stopped in the nursery doorway. His gaze landed on the cradle, on the tiny bundle inside, then flicked to Mara's face. For a heartbeat, his expression was merely stunned. Then the scent hit him. His nostrils flared. Surprise burned away, leaving something uglier behind. "What," he said slowly, "is that?" Mara's spine stiffened. "Her name is Anwen," she said. "She's a pup." Disgust curled his lip. "In my house." "Our house," Mara corrected quietly. He ignored the correction. "You went to Ironwood and brought back a child?" His voice climbed in pitch. "What in the moon's name were you thinking?" Mara drew herself up, fingers still resting on the cradle's edge. "Saren is dead," she said, the words strange and bitter on her tongue. "Rogues took her on the ridge. She asked for me. She begged me to take Anwen. She made it legal before she—" She held out the parchment with her free hand. Brannock snatched it, eyes skimming the lines. As he read, his face darkened, the muscle in his jaw ticking. "Guardianship," he spat. "Of the Northern Ridge heir. You accepted this? Without speaking to me? What was I supposed to do?" Mara's voice sharpened. "Leave her there? Let Kale's council tear her apart, decide whether a wolfless child is fit to be seen or must be hidden?" Brannock's head snapped up. "Wolfless?" The word hung between them like a curse. "Saren believed Anwen has no wolf," Mara said, meeting his gaze. "She feared what that would mean for the child. That's why she chose me. Because I know what it is to live that way." Brannock stared at her as if she'd struck him. "You brought a wolfless pup of another male into my home," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what they'll say? What this will do to my standing?" Mara's stomach twisted. This isn't about your standing. A woman died today. She trusted me with her child. I'm honor-bound. You're honor-bound to me, he snapped. To this pack. To the bond you swore. Or have you forgotten that in your eagerness to play nursemaid to a Blackwell mistake? The words hit like slaps. Mara took a step back, bumping into the cradle. Anwen stirred, soft sound hitching in her sleep. How can you call her that? Mara whispered. She's an infant. She's a stain, Brannick snarled. A liability. A wolfless burden that belongs to another alpha. Do you think Kale will just shrug and let you walk away with his get? When he comes hunting, do you think he'll care about your healer's parchment or your bleeding heart? Fear slid icy fingers down Mara's spine. She hadn't let herself think that far, not really. But she forced her chin up. If he comes, we'll face that when it happens, she said. Until then, she's mine to protect. Ours, if you'd. Ours? His laugh was sharp and ugly. No, Mara. I won't have it. Send her back. Mara stared at him. Send her back? Take her to some neutral orphanage, some outer village, Brannick said, flicking his hand as if the solution were obvious. Tell them to keep quiet about where she came from. Ironwood and Northern Ridge can tear each other apart looking for her for all I care, but she will not stay under my roof. No, the word came out before she could stop it. Brannick's eyes narrowed. No? You didn't see Saren's face, Mara said, voice shaking but steadying with each word. You didn't hear her beg. You didn't hold Anwen and feel, she broke off, swallowing hard. I gave my word. I won't break it. Not for your reputation. Not for anything. Brannick's gaze went cold as river ice. Then you leave me no choice, he said. A chill crawled up Mara's neck. What does that mean? It means, Brannick replied, each word clipped, you choose. Right now. Me and this pack, or that child. Silence crashed into the room. The air seemed to thicken, crowding Mara's lungs. She looked down at the cradle, at Anwen's tiny hand fisted around the blanket's edge, at the way her chest rose and fell in innocent rhythm. Saren's voice echoed in her mind. Please. Swear it. Mara had already chosen, hours ago in a dim ironwood chamber. This was just another person demanding she repeat it. She lifted her gaze and met her husband's eyes. I choose her, Mara said. For a moment, Brannick's expression went utterly blank. Then something like contempt slid over his features. Pack your things, he said. You have until the hour turns. Mara's throat closed. You're banishing me. I won't have my household tainted by another man's wolfless brat, he said coldly. You want to play at being a martyr? Do it somewhere else. You may take the clothes on your back and whatever you can carry without help. No coin from our coffers. No escort. Anyone who aids you answers to me. Brannick, she whispered. Be reasonable. I am your wife. You were my wife, he corrected. Until you chose otherwise. You made your oath to that child, not to me. Now live with it. He turned on his heel and strode out before she could answer. For a long, shaking moment, Mara stood motionless beside the cradle, the world reduced to the sound of her own heartbeat and Anwen's soft breathing. Then she moved. There was no time for shock, for anger, for grief. Those would come later, she was sure of it, like waves crashing long after the stone had already been thrown. For now there was only the promise she'd made and the tiny life depending on her to keep it. She grabbed a second cloak from the peg, Brannock's, thick and fur-lined, and rolled it tight. A small satchel took shape quickly, a few changes of clothes, the food from Ironwood's kitchen, a spare blanket. She tucked Saren's parchment deep into an inner pocket. Last, she lifted Anwen from the cradle. The baby fussed at being disturbed, face scrunching. Mara rocked her gently, murmuring nonsense until the little body relaxed again. She wrapped Anwen snug in the knitted blanket and settled her against her chest, tying her cloak around them both so the baby's head nestled just below her chin. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to deepening blue. The first stars pricked through the clouds as Mara stepped over the threshold of the house she'd thought would be her last. No one stopped her. A few neighbors watched from their doorways, curiosity and faint disapproval in their eyes, but none moved to intervene. Brannock's word carried weight here. A banished wife and a stranger's child weren't worth opposing him over. Mara kept her head high as she walked through the village and out the gate. Only when the palisade was a dark line behind her did she let her shoulders sag. The forest swallowed her quickly. Trees loomed on either side, their trunks black against the fading light. A wind rose, tugging at her cloak, sending dead leaves skittering across the path. Anwen whimpered once, then burrowed closer, the warmth of her small body a fragile anchor in the encroaching dark. Mara's feet knew where to go even before her mind caught up. When she'd been a girl, too sensitive and too strange for the other pups, she'd found refuge in a half-forgotten hunting cabin near the borderlands. Her father had used it in his youth, then abandoned it when the pack's territory shifted. No one went there now. It wasn't much, but it was 4 walls and a roof. With every step, the weight of what she'd lost pressed harder. A husband. A home. The thin veneer of respectability her marriage had given a wolfless woman in a world that prized teeth and claws. In their place, she had a baby who wasn't hers by blood but already felt woven into her bones. You and I, Mara murmured to the sleeping bundle, we're quite the disappointments, aren't we? Wolfless and unwanted. The words should have tasted like despair. Instead, there was something else braided through them. A stubborn, simmering ember of defiance. Then we'll build something that isn't based on what they want, she whispered. Just you and me. By the time the cabin came into view, a squat shape nestled between 2 ancient oaks, smoke-blackened roof sagging but still intact. The moon had climbed high enough to silver the clearing. Mara's legs trembled with exhaustion, but relief loosened a knot between her shoulders. The door stuck, but she put her shoulder to it and it gave with a groan. The interior smelled of dust and old ashes. A crude table, a narrow bed frame, a stone hearth. It wasn't much, but it was theirs for tonight. She laid Anwen gently on the bed, using Brannock's thick cloak as a makeshift mattress, then set about coaxing a small fire to life in the hearth with the few logs left stacked in the corner. Sparks caught, flame licking up the dry bark, sending a weak but welcome warmth into the room. When the fire was stable, Mara sat on the edge of the bed and lifted Anwen into her arms again. Firelight painted the baby's cheeks gold, shadows making her lashes look impossibly long. Mara brushed a fingertip across her brow. I don't know how we'll eat next week, she admitted softly. I don't know how I'll keep you warm when the snow comes. I don't know how to stop an alpha if he decides to tear you away from me. Her throat tightened. She bent and pressed a kiss to Anwen's forehead. But I know this, she whispered against the soft skin. You are not a stain. You are not a burden. You are mine, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. Outside, wind rattled the bare branches. The forest's darkness pressed close around the little pool of firelight as if listening. Mara didn't hear the low growl carried faintly on that wind. She didn't see the huge, dark shape pacing the tree line far beyond the cabin, or the way its head lifted, nostrils flaring as it caught the twin threads of scent spiraling up through the chimney, one familiar, one unbearably new. She only heard Anwen's tiny sigh as the baby settled more deeply against her, and the comforting crackle of the fire. Mara believed she'd reached the bottom. Exiled, penniless, with only a borrowed child and a forgotten cabin between her and the vast, indifferent world. She had no idea that out there in the shadows, an alpha with winter in his eyes and blood on his hands had already found their trail, and that his arrival would turn her exile into the beginning of everything. The wind was up again. It hissed through the trees around the cabin, slipping under the eaves, rattling the shutters. Mara woke with a start, heart hammering, unsure what had dragged her from sleep, the wind, the dying embers in the hearth, or the heavy sense of being watched. Anwen slept in the crook of her arm, warm and solid and utterly trusting. Mara smoothed a hand over the baby's back, listening. There. Beneath the wind. A low, rolling growl, too deep to be any ordinary wolf. The hairs on her arms lifted. She eased herself off the bed, cradling Anwen against her chest. The floorboards were cold under her bare feet as she crossed to the door. Light leaked gray around the edges, dawn had barely dragged itself over the horizon. Another growl, closer now. Mara's fingers closed on the wooden bar that held the door shut. "Who's there?" she called, hating the waver in her voice. Silence answered first. Then a voice, roughened by the cold and something darker. "Open the door." The words weren't shouted, but they hit like an order. Her wolfless blood should have made her immune to the alpha's pull everyone whispered about, but her body responded anyway, muscles tensing, breath catching. Mara swallowed hard. "This cabin is claimed," she said. "Who are you?" A pause. The wind tossed a flurry of dead leaves against the wall. Then, clear and sharp through the wood, Cale Blackwell, Alpha of Northern Ridge. "Open this door, or I take it off its hinges." Every bit of warmth drained from Mara's limbs. "He found us." Anwen stirred, sensing the spike of Mara's fear. Tiny fingers bunched in her shift. Holding the baby tight, Mara lifted the bar. The door flew inward on a gust of cold air and swirling leaves. He filled the threshold like a storm-given skin, tall, broad-shouldered, dark leather strapped over corded muscle, half a dozen weapons visible and the suggestion of more hidden. His hair was tied back at his nape, damp with sweat or melted frost. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes. His eyes were winter, pale and burning. They swept once over the cramped interior, then locked on Mara and the bundle in her arms. Fury sharpened his features into something almost inhuman. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded. The words cracked like thunder in the small room. Mara's arms tightened automatically around Anwen. "She's right here," she managed. "And you're frightening her." The baby started to cry, thin and reedy at first, then rising, distressed by the sudden noise and cold. The sound struck Cale like a blow. He lurched forward a step, hand lifting. Mara stumbled back, shoulder hitting the doorframe. "Don't touch her," she blurted. His gaze snapped to her face, incredulous. "You dare." "I promised Saren," Mara said, the name out before she could think better of it. I won't hand Anwen to a stranger who barges into my home roaring like a beast. Your home? His lip curled. You mean the cabin you fled to after stealing my child from her dying mother's side? Guilt stabbed her, sharp and undeserved. I didn't steal her. Saren. You weren't there when I returned. His voice dropped, more dangerous for its quiet. There was blood on the floor and ash in the hearth where they burned her bandages. My mate was on the pyre, my daughter gone, and your scent all over the room. He took another step forward, finger stabbing the air between them in accusation. You left my Luna to die alone and stole my air for your own barren fantasies. The words hit everything raw inside her. I held Saren's hand when she took her last breath, Mara said, anger pushing past fear. I listened to her beg me to protect Anwen from the vultures that would circle once she was gone. I did not abandon her. She asked for you, Kale said, pace quickening, fury breaking through his composure. My guards said she insisted. I thought, his jaw flexed. I thought you'd come to comfort her. To stand as friend at her pyre. Instead I come home to emptiness and a trail to this, he flung a hand toward the forest. To you. Anwen's wails climbed higher, thin chest hitching. Whatever else he was, Kale wasn't immune to that sound. His gaze flicked to the baby, and something like agony crossed his face before he slammed it down. Give her to me, he said, voice raw. Now. Mara's hands were shaking, but she held Anwen closer. Not until you stop shouting and listen. You forget your place, Wolfless. I have no place, Mara snapped. My husband cast me out for keeping my word. My pack turned their backs. The only thing I have left is this child and the promise I made her mother. If you're going to rip her from my arms, you will at least hear the truth first. For a moment she thought he'd seize Anwen anyway. His body thrummed with restrained violence, muscles bunching, eyes gone sharp and bright. Then, slowly, Kale forced a breath in through his nose. The air in the cabin shifted with it. Make it quick, he said. Mara took a steadying breath of her own and moved sideways, keeping the bed between them as a foolish, fragile barrier. Anwen's cries had dulled to hiccuping sobs, cheek pressed against Mara's collarbone. She told me Anwen might be wolfless, Mara said. That your line is obsessed with strength and legacy, that your council would use her against you. She was afraid you'd be forced to choose between your oath to them and your love for your daughter. Kale's stare went flat. Saren said that. Yes. Mara shifted Anwen slightly, patting her back. She also said you would bleed for your child, but that you wouldn't break your pack for her. She didn't want Anwen to be a bargaining piece in some power struggle. She is not wolfless, he ground out. She's an infant. Wolves don't present that young. Mara held his gaze. Do you feel her wolf? The question seemed to cut deeper than any accusation. Something flickered behind his eyes, uncertainty, quickly buried. He didn't answer. Instead he stepped into the room fully, the crowding presence of him making the cabin seem half its size. When Mara retreated another pace, her calf hit the chair by the hearth. You said you made a promise. His attention snagged on the pocket of her cloak, where the edge of parchment peaked. And I smelled wax and ink under Saren's scent. Mara swallowed. She had papers drafted. Guardianship documents. She pushed them into my hands before she died. It's the only reason I believed I had the right to take Anwen from Ironwood. He held out his hand, palm up. The simple gesture carried all the weight of an order. Mara hesitated. She's been my daughter in every way that matters for less than a day, she said. If I hand you this and you decide my promise meant nothing. If the papers are real, you have more protection than you think, he cut in. Even from me. After a heartbeat's war, she pulled the parchment free and passed it across. His fingers brushed hers, brief, accidental. A jolt shot up her arm, like touching a too-hot kettle and realizing too late. She flinched, more from surprise than pain. Cale's eyes snapped to her face again, pupils narrowing, nostrils flaring. For a moment his expression went strangely distant, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he looked down at the seal and broke it with his thumb. The silence stretched as he read. Anwen whimpered once more, then quieted, the hiccup subsiding where her cheek rested against Mara's skin. The baby's breathing slowed, matching Mara's heartbeat. Finally, Cale exhaled. The signatures are valid, he said, voice low. Saren, 2 witnesses, our Pact's legal mark. Temporarily, under the condition of her death and my absence, guardianship of Anwen Blackwell passes to, he swallowed. Mara Alden. He rolled the parchment carefully, jaw tight. When he looked up, some of the murderous fury had drained from his face, leaving grief and something like bone-deep exhaustion. She thought I'd reject my own child, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She thought others might force your hand, Mara corrected, unexpectedly moved to defend a man who'd just called her a kidnapper. She never said you didn't love Anwen. Only that your love might not be enough against all the weight of your name. His gaze sharpened on her again, assessing. And you? Cale asked. What do you think of me, Mara Alden? Honestly? Terrifying. Dangerous. The last person she wanted deciding her fate. But he'd come, through blood and grief and winter forest, straight to the door of a forgotten cabin because his child was missing. That had to mean something. I think, she said slowly, you're standing in a shack arguing with a banished wolfless woman instead of simply taking what you want. That suggests you're not the monster Saren feared, and not the saint she hoped for. One corner of his mouth twitched. Careful, he said. You'll offend my reputation. I believe your reputation can withstand the insult. For a heartbeat, the air between them shifted, less blade, more, something else. Then Anwen let out a small coo, drawing both their gazes. Cale moved closer, slower this time, as if approaching a skittish animal. His hand lifted toward Anwen's downy head, hesitated inches from her. May I? He asked. The question startled her more than a demand would have. Mara nodded. His fingers brushed Anwen's crown, thick-knuckled and surprisingly gentle. The baby sighed, tiny mouth curving in sleep. Cale's breath hitched. My little star, he murmured, voice cracking. The sound speared straight through Mara's chest. Whatever else he was, this man loved his child. When he drew his hand back, the brutal resolve had seeped into his features again. The law gives you guardianship until a higher authority rules otherwise, Cale said. In Northern Ridge, that authority is me. Mara's stomach dropped. Meaning? Meaning you will bring Anwen to my territory. His gaze pinned her. You will live under my roof as her caretaker while I decide how to honor both Saren's wishes and my daughter's birthright. Mara shook her head before he finished. You think I'll just walk into your stronghold and trust you not to strip her from me the moment it suits you? If I intended to take her by force, you'd already be bleeding on this floor, he said bluntly. I came as alpha, not as kidnapper. You want protection for her. I want my child where I can see she's safe. Our goals aren't as far apart as you think. She hated that he was right. The cabin had felt like sanctuary last night. In the clear light of morning, with the wind cutting through gaps in the boards and the memory of Brannock's contempt still stinging, it looked more like a fragile lie. Food wouldn't last. Winter would come. And if Cale chose to challenge Saren's parchment through the courts or by raw power, a wolfless woman alone in the woods wouldn't stand a chance. In your territory, Mara said slowly, your word is law. Yes. Then I want your word. Her voice steadied. Until we formalize another agreement, Anwen remains under my guardianship. You don't take her from my care. You don't hide her away or hand her to some wet nurse whose name you won't remember in a year. His brows lifted, faintly amused despite everything. You bargain like a council elder. I bargain like a mother who has nothing left to lose. Something in his expression softened at that word. Very well, he said. You have my word. Until we settle the legalities, Anwen stays with you. You will live in my home, under my protection, with the rights that parchment grants you. And if you break your word? Then you may show the document to any wolf with eyes and ears, he said. And remind them their alpha is an oathbreaker. See how long my rule lasts after that. Mara searched his face, looking for any sign of deceit. She saw only exhaustion and a fury too vast to fake. All right, she said at last. We'll come. A thread of tension eased from his shoulders. We leave within the hour, Cale said. My men are waiting. Of course they were. She'd seen no one through the cracks in the shutter, heard only the wind and his voice, but alphas didn't travel alone. Mara packed quickly, the same meager belongings she'd snatched from Braddock's house, plus a few more logs for the fire to burn itself out safely. She wrapped Anwen snug and stepped out into the clearing. The world outside had gone from slate gray to cold silver. Frost edged the leaf litter. The wind still teased dead leaves into little spirals around the clearing. 3 massive wolves waited at the tree line, pelts ranging from ash to near black, eyes bright as coins. They dipped their heads as Cale emerged, then shifted in quick blurs of motion, limbs contorting, fur dissolving into skin until 3 men in riding leathers stood where the beasts had been. None of them looked at Mara with anything like warmth, but their eyes slid respectfully to Anwen and their alpha. Alpha, one said. The horses are ready. Cale nodded, then lifted something from the side of the smallest mount, a stout, enclosed wagon more like a padded box on wheels than a carriage. You'll ride here, he told Mara. It's covered. She won't freeze. She bristled. I can ride a horse. Perhaps, he said. But not with a newborn in your arms and no wolf to steady your balance if she spooks. His gaze flicked briefly to her empty aura, then away. I will not risk her falling. Pride warred with practicality. In the end, practicality won. She climbed into the little compartment, settling on the bench with Anwen tucked close. Cale's hand appeared, gripping the frame to steady it as the wagon rocked. Her fingers brushed his again as she found her seat. The spark was there again, sharp, startling, like the air just before lightning strikes. It leaped from her skin to his and back, leaving her breathless. Cale's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat he didn't move, eyes locked on hers through the narrow opening. Then he dropped his hand and stepped away. The journey north blurred into rhythm and discomfort. The wolf set a punishing pace, the cabin and everything it represented vanishing quickly behind them. Trees thinned, then thickened again, the landscape shifting from familiar trails to harsher, steeper paths Mara had never walked. Through the small shuttered slit in the wagon wall, she caught flashes of Cale riding at the head of the column, posture loose but alert. The others took their cues from every tilt of his head, every subtle gesture. Even mounted, surrounded by armed escorts, his authority was a quiet thing, not the brittle, showy dominance Brannick wore like armor, but something deeper, steadier. As if the land itself accepted his presence. Once, as the trail narrowed, the wagon jolted on a hidden route. Mara jerked, clutching Anwen, a yelp escaping her. The vehicle lurched to a halt. Cale was there in an instant, hand on the frame. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, heart racing. Anwen slept on, unbothered. And used to being rattled like a sack of potatoes. The corner of his mouth twitched again. "We're nearly there," he said. "Another hour." "I thought Northern Ridge was farther." "From Ironwood," he said. "This cabin of yours is closer to my borders than to your former mate's. He'll be pleased to know he tossed you almost into my lap." Heat pricked at her cheeks. "I doubt he thinks of me at all." Cale's gaze lingered on her a fraction of a second too long, something unreadable flickering through it. Then he stepped back, signal flicking to his men. The wheels rolled on. By the time they crested the final rise, the sun was a pale smear behind clouds, turning the world the color of old bone. Mara sucked in a breath. Northern Ridge's stronghold rose from the valley like it had been carved from the mountains themselves, stone and timber fused together, towers crowned with watchfires, walls bristling with spikes. Smoke curled from a dozen chimneys. The howl of wolves carried faintly on the wind. It was nothing like Brannick's modest village. This place felt old and unyielding, built to withstand more than winter. The gates swung open as they approached, guards bowing low. The wagon rattled into a wide courtyard ringed by barracks and stables. Warriors paused in their drills to stare. Their eyes flicked over Mara's simple dress, her lack of aura, and the tiny bundle in her arms. Whispers rose, sharp as thrown stones. "Wolfless. The child, look, she has his nose. Is that enough?" Cale's voice cut through the murmurs without needing to be raised. "This is Mara Alden, temporary guardian to my daughter. She is under my protection. Any challenge to her is a challenge to me." Silence slammed down. Mara's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. Anwen stirred, fussing. Mara swayed instinctively, shushing her. An older woman detached herself from the edge of the crowd and approached, apron spotless, gray hair braided in a crown. Her eyes were quick and assessing but not unkind. "Alpha," she said with a small bow. "You've brought her home." "Yes, Sarah," Cale replied. The edge in his voice softened when he looked at the woman. "See that the nursery is prepared. And quarters for Mara adjoining it." Sarah's gaze flicked to Mara, then to the baby, and for the first time since leaving the cabin, Mara saw something like warmth. "Of course," Sarah said. "Come along, dear. We'll get the little one settled." The nursery made Mara's throat tight. Light flooded through tall windows. A cradle carved with running wolves sat beneath a mobile of wooden stars. Shelves held toys and tiny folded clothes. Someone had poured hope into this room long before Anwen was born. Mara laid Anwen gently in the cradle. The baby stretched, fist punching the air, then settled, lashes dark smudges against her cheeks. Beautiful, Sarah murmured. She looks like her mother around the eyes. Poor thing. Poor? Mara echoed. Sarah glanced around, then lowered her voice. The Luna and Alpha, they had their troubles. Separate chambers these last years. Everyone knew, though no one spoke of it. She sighed. He loved her, in his way. But there was always a shadow between them. Some hurt we weren't privy to. Now she's gone, and he carries that shadow alone. Guilt. Mara felt it like a chill draft, even without knowing the shape of it yet. Sarah showed her the adjoining room, a small but comfortable chamber with a bed, washstand, and chest. You'll be close enough to hear when she cries, the woman said. And far enough that you can rest when the Alpha takes his turn. Mara blinked. His turn? He insisted, Sarah said, approval warming her tone. Said he'd not be one of those fathers who only see their children when they're big enough to swing a sword. That image, a grim Alpha rocking a squalling infant, lodged somewhere warm inside Mara. The days blurred. Anwen's needs were simple and constant: food, warmth, clean cloths, comfort. Mara fell into the rhythm of midnight feedings, endless soothing, the strange peace of watching a baby breathe. Cale kept his distance at first, burying himself in patrols and council meetings. But whenever he was in the house, he found his way to the nursery. He was awkward, at the beginning. His large hands fumbled with the tiny buttons on Anwen's shirts, his attempt at swaddling looked like a botched knot. But he learned quickly. Mara woke one night to Anwen's cry and stumbled into the nursery to find Cale already there, shirt half unlaced, hair mussed from sleep. He paced with the baby tucked against his chest, murmuring under his breath in a language Mara didn't know. When he noticed her in the doorway, he went still. I had her, he said, defensive and oddly boyish. She just wanted walking. You're doing fine, Mara said, surprised to mean it. Here. She stepped close, reaching to adjust Anwen's position. Her fingers brushed Cale's again. The now familiar spark jumped between them, sharp and electric. They both froze. Anwen gurgled, utterly unimpressed, and tugged on Cale's beard. Traitor, he muttered to his daughter, but his eyes stayed locked on Mara's a moment longer than necessary. Something tight and yearning flickered there before he looked away. The pack watched them. Mara heard the comments, some barbed, some merely curious. A wolfless guardian? Maybe the Alpha's finally lost his mind. She stands up to him like she doesn't know he could snap her in half. Once, in the corridor, a young warrior sneered openly as she passed. Careful, he said. We wouldn't want the Alpha's pup growing up soft with a human heart and no wolf to guide her. Before Mara could respond, a growl reverberated down the hallway. Cale stepped out of the shadows, eyes cold. Repeat that, he said. The warrior paled. Alpha, I only meant. You meant to insult the woman raising my daughter, Cale said. And by extension, insult me. His lip curled. If you're so concerned about wolves, go run the perimeter until you remember the use of your teeth. The warrior fled. Cale's gaze cut to Mara. For once, he looked almost embarrassed. You don't need to fight my battles, she said quietly. I don't. His voice was rough. But I will. It became harder to hate him after that. Harder, and more confusing. Mara tried to anchor herself in what she did know, Saren. Her laughter. Her sharp wit. The way her letters had stopped after she married Cale. One afternoon, while Anwen napped and the house hummed with a rare quiet, Sarah brought Mara a box. "We thought these should go to the baby," she said. The Luna kept them in her room. Inside were little things, a shawl that still smelled faintly of Saren's wildflower perfume, a pair of silver earrings, a sketchbook bound in worn leather. She used to draw, Sarah said fondly. Mostly when she couldn't sleep. Said it kept the ghosts quiet. After the housekeeper left, Mara carried the box to the sitting room attached to Saren's old chambers. The air there felt different, thick with memories and unshed grief. Moonlight slanted through the windows, falling across a dressing table still scattered with combs and jars as if their owner might return at any moment. Mara sat in a chair by the window and opened the sketchbook. The early pages were filled with quick, laughing lines, wolves in motion, the curve of Cale's jaw as he looked away from the artist, landscapes of the ridge and valley. Later drawings grew darker, more angular. Empty chairs. A bed with a deep hollow on one side. A woman's shadow, stretching long and alone. Mara's chest ached. She flipped forward idly, fingers tracing the spine. Something felt off. Slightly thicker in one section. Frowning, she ran her thumb along the back cover. A faint ridge caught her nail. When she pressed it, a small panel popped free with a soft click. Behind it, tucked into the hollow of the spine, was a narrow, leather-bound journal. Ice slid down Mara's spine. Her name wasn't on the cover. But somehow she knew, before she even opened it, that what waited inside would have everything to do with her. She drew a breath and flipped to the first page that fell open. The ink there was darker, fresher than the sketches, Saren's looping hand marching across the parchment. He felt her tonight. Mara's eyes tracked the words, heart picking up. We were at that ridiculous birthday gathering in Brannock's Hall. I thought it would be another evening of forced smiles and politics, but then Cale went still beside me. Completely still, like a wolf scenting blood on the wind. I followed his gaze and saw her across the room. Laughing with that careless way she has, completely unaware that my mate's soul had just collided with hers. My mate's soul. Mara's stomach turned. The room seemed to tilt. She forced herself to read the next line. Mara Alden has no idea. The words blurred. Mara stared down at the ink, at her own name tangled with Saren's pain, and felt the ground of her life shift beneath her feet in a way that had nothing to do with exile, or babies, or Alpha's claims. Everything she thought she knew about that night in Brannock's Hall, about Cale, about Saren's marriage, about the strange, sharp pull she'd felt when the Northern Ridge Alpha's gaze brushed hers across the crowd, rose up like ghosts around her. For the first time since stepping into Northern Ridge, Mara wasn't sure who she was more afraid of, the furious Alpha who'd tracked her to a cabin in the woods. Or the truth Saren had hidden in this journal, waiting like a snare for the day Mara was brave, or foolish, enough to spring it. She turned the page with trembling fingers. Mara read until the candle burned low and the windows went from black to the thin gray of approaching dawn. Saren's voice flowed from the pages, bright and sharp even in ink. She wrote of that night in Brannock's Hall, how the music had been too loud, the wine too sweet, the politics too thick. How Cale had gone suddenly still beside her, chalice half-raised, eyes fixed on something across the room. Saren corrected herself in the journal. I followed his gaze and saw her. Mara. Laughing at some foolish joke, wolfless and unaware and so very alive. My mate's soul snapped taut like a bowstring, pulling toward her. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak. But I felt the bond between us thin, like spun glass. Page after page, Saren bled. She wrote of waking to Cale whispering Mara's name in his sleep, of catching the brief, hungry way he watched Mara at later gatherings before tearing his gaze away. Of the way the mate bond frayed every time he fought it, leaving them both raw and brittle. I tried to hate her, Saren confessed. But how do you hate a woman who doesn't even know she holds your life in her hands? It isn't her fault the moon chose her. It isn't his fault, either. We are all trapped in the same cruel design. Near the end, the entries turned to Anwen. If anything happens to me, Saren wrote, the ink blotched as if her hand had trembled, I want Anwen with Mara. Cale's soul has been reaching for her for years. Perhaps the moon meant for the three of them to be a family, and I was only the bridge. If so, I will not stand in the way, even in death. Mara closed the journal on those words, fingers pressed hard to the worn leather, as if she could keep her heart from bursting out through her ribs. Guilt tangled with anger, with disbelief, with something far more dangerous, a low, insistent recognition. She remembered that night in Brannock's hall now, the weight of a stranger's gaze across the room, the way her skin had prickled as if she'd stepped too close to a fire. She'd written it off as nerves at being near the famed Alpha of Northern Ridge. And again, at the cabin door, when his fingers had brushed hers and sparks leaped up her arm. Her stomach churned. This was Saren's hurt, Saren's marriage. Who was Mara to step into the wreckage and claim anything? Yet the mate bond was what it was, an old, wild magic that didn't care about vows spoken after the fact. Saren had known that and still, in the end, she'd written this. Mara could run from it. Pretend she'd never opened the journal. Leave Northern Ridge quietly, as Cale had offered to arrange, raise Anwen in some quiet corner of the world and never look back. Anwen's soft cry drifted down the corridor. Mara straightened. Running might soothe her conscience for a season. It would not honor the woman who'd trusted her with a child and a future. It would not change the pull she felt, or the way Cale's face haunted her when she closed her eyes. By the time she heard his footsteps outside the nursery, her decision was made. Early light spilled through the tall windows of Anwen's room, painting the carved wolves on the cradle in pale gold. Cale stood over his sleeping daughter, one hand braced on the cradle's edge, the other resting lightly on her blanket. The fierce alpha from the forest was nowhere in his face. This Cale was simply a father trying to memorize the shape of his child's breathing. Cale, Mara said. He glanced over his shoulder. Whatever he saw in her expression had him straightening, shoulders squaring as if bracing for impact. Mara. She stepped into the room, Saren's journal clutched against her ribs. Her heart pounded so hard she felt each beat in her throat. It's me, she said. I'm the woman Saren wrote about. I'm your fated mate. The words snapped like a banner unfurling in a storm wind. For a heartbeat, his expression went utterly blank. Then torment crashed through it, raw and unguarded. I wondered how long it would take you to find that, he said hoarsely. You knew? Her voice sharpened. Since when? Since that cursed night in Brannock's hall, Cale said. He dropped his hand from the cradle, fingers curling into a fist. You walked past me in that yellow dress, smelling of apples and rain, and my wolf nearly clawed out of my skin. I was already bound to Saren. I thought it was some cruel mistake. I spent years trying to tear the feeling out by the roots. Mara's fingers tightened on the journal. And in the cabin? His gaze caught hers, helpless. I recognized the pull the moment you opened the door. And you said nothing. What would have changed? Bitterness edged his voice. Saren was alive. You were bound to another. The bond had already ruined one marriage. I wouldn't let it take a second woman's life apart. It took hers anyway, Mara whispered. Pain flickered in his eyes. He looked away. It doesn't matter, he said. Saren is gone. Whatever the moon decreed years ago, I failed her in every way that counts. Taking you now would turn that failure into betrayal carved in stone. He drew a steadying breath, the alpha mask settling over his features. When the snow eases, I'll have provisions and coins arranged, Cale said. You and Anwen will leave Northern Ridge with an escort. You can choose any territory that will have you. I'll ensure you're comfortable. The words landed like blows. You're sending us away, Mara said slowly. Both of us. It's the only way to keep you safe from this bond. His jaw clenched. Everyone I love gets broken by it. I won't watch it happen again. You arrogant idiot, she breathed. His head snapped back to her. What did you call me? You heard. Fire licked up through her fear, through the tangle of guilt. You're so busy wallowing in what you did wrong that you can't see what Saren actually wanted. She flipped the journal open, turning to the final entries. Her hands trembled, but her voice steadied. She wrote that she believed the moon meant for the three of us to be a family, Mara said. That she wouldn't stand in the way of it, even in death. She chose me for Anwen. She chose you, even when it hurt. Her throat burned. Are you really going to honor her memory by ignoring her last wish? His composure cracked. Her last wish shouldn't have been to fix a bond one broke, he snapped. She deserved better than spending her life choking on someone else's destiny. And what do you think you're doing now? Mara demanded. You're so afraid of hurting me that you'd rather rip yourself out of Anwen's life completely? You think that will do less damage? As if summoned by her name, Anwen stirred, face scrunching. A thin wail rose. Both of them moved at once. Cale reached her first, scooping her up with the ease of practice. Anwen's cries softened as she pressed her cheek against his chest, fist tangling in the laces of his shirt. He held her like something breakable, eyes shadowed. Maybe she'd be better off without me, he said quietly, almost to himself. She's so small. She'd forget. You could tell her stories about a father who died a hero instead of watching the man who ruined two women with the same bond. Mara stared at him, something inside her snapping. You listen to me, Cale Blackwell, she said, stepping closer. You are her father. She knows your scent, your voice, the rhythm of your heart. You disappearing from her life would carve a wound in her she'd never be able to name. That is not protection. That is cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. His head jerked up at that word. Their gazes collided, a clash of winter and wildfire. You think I'm not afraid? Mara went on, voice shaking. I am. I'm terrified. Of the bond. Of what it means for Saren, for us. But I've watched you sit up all night with a sick baby, take Barb's meant for me without flinching, defend a wolfless woman in front of your entire pack. I love you for those things, Cale. Not because some ancient magic says I must, but because you have shown me who you are when no one is watching. Her confession hung in the air, bare and trembling. I won't leave, she finished. Not because of a bond, and not because you're afraid of failing again." Silence fell, heavy and thick. Anwen blinked up at them, sensing the tension. Her tiny hand reached up, patting at Cale's jaw. "Duh," she said. Clear as a bell. Cale went utterly still. Anwen twisted, other hand stretching toward Mara. Her fingers opened and closed, demanding. "Mama," she added, impatient. The word slammed through Mara like a physical impact. She saw it hit Cale just as hard. His eyes went wide, then wet, his mouth parting on a sound that might have been a sob strangled halfway. "She chose," Mara whispered. "Both of us." Something in him broke then, not in the shattering way Saren had written of, but like a dam giving way, releasing a flood that had been straining against its walls for years. His shoulders sagged. The fight left his eyes, replaced by raw, aching tenderness. "I am so tired of running from you," he said hoarsely. He stepped closer, gently shifting Anwen into Mara's arms. The baby settled happily, patting Mara's collarbone as if pleased with her own cleverness. Cale's hands came up, framing Mara's face. His thumbs brushed dampness from her cheeks she hadn't realized was there. "Fate tied us in knots long before we had a say," he murmured. "But this," his gaze searched hers. "This we choose. You. Me. Our daughter. And for whatever it's worth, Mara Alden. I love you too." The world seemed to hold its breath. When his mouth met hers, the bond roared to life. It was like stepping into sunlight after years underground, heat and rightness, and a sense of something ancient sliding into place. For a heartbeat, she felt his grief, his guilt, his fierce love for both Saren and Anwen. He felt her loneliness, her stubborn hope, the raw, bright thread of her love for him and the child between them. Then the sensation settled, not fading but sinking deep, woven into bone and blood. When they parted, both were gasping. Anwen giggled, as if pleased with the show. Weeks later, the great hall of Northern Ridge blazed with torchlight. Wolves filled the space, warriors on the floor, elders in the gallery, the curious and skeptical packed tight. Banners hung from the rafters, the Blackwell crest dominating the far wall. Cale stood at the center of it all, clad in ceremonial leathers and fur, posture steady. At his side, Mara wore a simple but finely made gown in the colors of the ridge, her hair braided and crowned with a circlet that felt too heavy and exactly right all at once. Anwen, in a tiny cloak stitched with the same crest, clung to Mara's hip and gnawed on the edge of her own hood. "People of Northern Ridge," Cale said, his voice carrying easily to every corner. "You have mourned with me. You have buried Luna and wondered what would become of this pack." A murmur answered. "This is what becomes of us," he went on. "We endure. We honor the dead by fighting for the living. Saren Blackwell's last act was to entrust our daughter to a woman she believed fate had chosen for us. She was right." He turned, meeting Mara's gaze, and held out his hand. "This is Mara," he said to his people. "Wolfless. Banished. Brave enough to defy an alpha and a husband to keep a promise. My fated mate. Your Luna." Resistance flared in some faces. Mara saw it, the tightening of jaws, the flicker of disdain. But she also saw the ones who softened, remembering the night she'd walked the halls with a crying baby, the way she'd stood in front of a sneering warrior and refused to bow. Cale's authority rolled through the room like distant thunder. "Who challenges my choice?" he asked. Silence answered. The claim settled. Later, As the hall buzzed with cautious celebration and the first cracks in old prejudices began to show, Mara caught sight of a familiar figure near the back, a man in well-cut leathers, face gone pale. Brannick. His gaze raked over her, over Anwen on her hip, over Cale's hand resting possessively at the small of her back. Disbelief warred with something uglier in his eyes. Cale followed her line of sight. His jaw hardened. "Say the word," he murmured. "I'll have him thrown out." Mara considered it, the satisfaction of seeing Brannick humiliated, marched past the very wolves who now bowed to her. She exhaled, the last of that life slipping from her shoulders like an old cloak. "No," she said. "Let him stay. Let him see." Their eyes met across the hall. Brannick's mouth moved, forming her name. Mara simply lifted her chin and turned away, closing that door for good. Anwen patted her shoulder. "Mama," she said around a fistful of cloak. Mara smiled, leaning into Cale's side as the pack's howls rose around them, a rough, wild chorus. From wolfless outcast to Luna. From a barren wife to a mother. She hadn't begged for this life. Fate had shoved it into her arms in the form of a terrified baby in the woods and a furious alpha at her door. But standing there between Cale and Anwen, the heat of the bond steady in her bones, Mara knew one thing with fierce, unshakable certainty. When everything shifted, she had chosen to step forward instead of back. And this family, this pack, this future, was her reward. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next chapter.